Hey folks, welcome to the Appalachian Roundup. This is episode 5. We're going to talk about diseases of despair and their connection to capitalism. Stay with me. The Appalachian Regional Consortium, combined with the Center for Rural Health and Research at East Tennessee State University and the Walsh Center for Rural Health Analysis at the University of Chicago, have published some research looking at Appalachian diseases of despair. I'll have those in the links down below. But all of them basically point to the larger problem, which is mortality rates are going up on all the measures, especially since the pandemic. So what are diseases of despair? It's a combination of things. Basically, they want to define it as three things. One, it's drug and alcohol overdoses, suicide, and alcohol-related liver disease. The research shows that between 2017 and 2018, these diseases of despair were declining. Between 2019 and 2020, however, the mortality rate started to jump up by quite a bit, 24% in Appalachia and 20% outside of Appalachia. And so these diseases of despair are primarily located in rural America. And so Appalachia is one of the worst places in the United States for these diseases of despair. And the numbers really shot up in this period of time between 2019 and 2020. In fact, the mortality rate was 37% higher in Appalachia than elsewhere. When you break the diseases of despair down into the three components, overdoses jumped up by 50%, suicide by 25%, and psoriasis or cirrhosis of the liver by 16%. In particular, the report says that opioids is the number one killer. And these opioids comprised of 77% of the overdoses. That was around 7,000, more than 7,000 deaths in Appalachia alone on opioid overdoses. The Appalachian Regional Commission says that in the entire region of Appalachia, central Appalachian region, that area was the hardest hit. Now, this research is medical research, and they don't really delve into or speculate on the causes of diseases of despair, especially in terms of the social, political, and economic causes. But that's where I come in. That's what I want to look at. What are the causes of diseases of despair? In particular, the opioid diseases and opioid deaths, the overdosing. Which again killed more than 7,000 people in that 1 year. So the question I would ask, particularly given what we know about Purdue Pharma and the role of large corporations producing, manufacturing, distributing the opioids, what role they played. So I would ask a question something like this: how much of diseases of despair are corporate induced and highly profitable? I think you want to follow the money. What we know is that the opioid epidemic has claimed about more than 500,000 lives in the United States since the mid-1990s. In the mid-1990s, pharmaceutical companies started aggressively marketing this new painkiller, and Purdue Pharma was one of the major benefactors, creators, and promoters of it, and that therein lies, part of the core. In 2020, Purdue Pharma, the maker of OxyContin, pled guilty to federal criminal charges of conspiracy and kickbacks. They agreed to pay $8.3 billion in penalties. Sackler families admitted no wrongdoing, have regrets, they say, but they were not penalized. But really, that's just a drop in a bucket, okay? Because Purdue Pharma generated many more billions of dollars in profit than it paid out in penalties. In 2017, Purdue Pharma made something like $1.3 billion in profits off of OxyContin alone, just in that year. Since 1996, they've generated more than $30 billion in profits. But corporations like Purdue Pharma are not the only ones involved. You also have pharmacies. A number of pharmacies were involved in this whole process. CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aid all filled hundreds of thousands and maybe even millions of more prescriptions than they should have. In 2019, for example, Walgreens agreed to pay something like $269 million to settle allegations, illegitimately and illegally file prescriptions. Pharmacies overall have made billions of dollars on OxyContin. According to the U.S. House Oversight Committee, pharmacies made something like $17 billion of profit on OxyContin between 2006 and 2012. And then you also have the treatment industry, which is, again, a multi-billion-dollar industry. In 2019, the addiction treatment industry is worth something like $49 billion. Emergent Solutions, which makes Narcan, the nasal spray, it sells for $50 for 2 doses. It's over the counter, but they expect it to generate something like $1.1 to $1.2 billion annually in revenue. Again, the point is that the treatment industry is big money. So every component of this process is big money. So I say this is something like a capitalist-induced cycle of suffering, death, and attempted recovery, and it's all extremely profitable. And so you have to ask, what are the conditions that create this situation? How do we get to this point? How do we get to a point where a combination of large multinational corporations can addict a large population of Americans to an opioid? In fact, the US population consumes far more opioids than any other group of people on Earth. How does that come to be? That's a relevant question here. At the International Narcotics Control Board, US consumers devour 80% of the world's opioid supply, despite having only about 5% of the world's population. I mean, that's a huge disparity. One way to account for this huge disparity, insane, cruel number of overdoses, this kind of like circus of addiction and death and suffering. How do we explain this? One way to sort of think about it is the incredible power of corporations in the United States. Corporate power has risen dramatically in the United States since the 1970s. I mean, look, it's the United States, so corporations have had a special role in the history of the United States for a long time, but what a lot of people call the rise of sort of neoliberalism, this reassertion of liberalism, that started institutionally making headway in the United States, Britain, and a few other places in the late 1970s, it plays such a major role in this moment of emerging corporate power. And now, basically, we have a situation where markets organize most every aspect of our lives now, certainly exert some great amount of influence in most every aspect of our life, especially in terms of, in the United States, healthcare and in the pharmaceuticals industry. I mean, again, this is not the case elsewhere. You go to places like the EU, it's a very different ballgame. Pharmaceuticals have far less power, as well as the healthcare industry is far less freewheeling and based on the market. It has a lot more regulation and oversight, especially in advanced industrialized countries, like say the EU, throughout the EU and Scandinavia, areas that aren't necessarily in the EU. Also Australia. There's just a number of examples that basically you can have areas of life, like say healthcare, pharmaceuticals, that are not directly subject to the market in the same way that you do in the United States. The point is, when you have our lives organized in this way around markets, given such great power to corporations, then you get a situation where corporations can basically market and addict huge populations of the United States, and not other places in the world. One of the ways to think about this is that when you have market competition, markets yield winners and losers. And in Purdue Pharma and the various other corporations that have generated a great deal of profits, since the mid-1990s, that those companies have been the winners, and Appalachia and the addicted and the dead population are the losers, basically, in this whole sort of market exchange process. So when we look at these deaths of despair and we look at reports and research on deaths of despair, certainly it's horrible, that we have this situation. But in terms of what you should think about, is that a significant portion of the problem is systematic. Diseases of despair are extremely profitable business for American corporations. And in that sense, the deaths are unfortunate negative externalities, basically of a highly profitable economic exchange. But it's not going to stop Purdue Pharma from making OxyContin.
selling it, distributing it, and making billions of dollars from it. Generally, this activity is going to keep going on. That's making a lot of money off addicting people is truly the American way. I mean, that is like what we have going on. So, unfortunately, I think that's the situation. All right, folks, thanks for hearing me out. I'll see you next time.